We're looking at Sicha, volume 23, the Sicha of Masei. The portion of Masei begins with the words, Eila Masei b'nei Yisrael sheyotzu mi'eretz Mitzrayim. These are the journeys of the children of Israel upon leaving Egypt. And it then recounts all the 42 journeys that they took, all the 42 stops that they took from Exodus until now over the past 40 years. And then I've asked a simple question. Why do we refer to them as journeys? We should refer to them as encampments. You're listing 42 places. That means 42 encampments. 42 spaces of visitation, not 42 journeys. A plain example would be somebody comes up from a trip to Europe. I say, tell me about your trip. Where were you? We went to Brussels. We went to London. We went to Paris. He's not telling you about his trips. He's telling you about his destinations. We visited Brussels. We visited London. We visited Paris. Not we journeyed London. We journeyed. It's not a list of journeys. The journeys are the flight numbers that you took in between. That's boring. That's the same thing as a flight, another flight, another flight. Obviously, from A to B, you got to have a journey. But what I'm telling you about, if I'm giving you a list of my places, are my destinations, my places of visitation, my encampments. That's what's interesting. When the Torah lists all these places, those are the encampments and not the journeys. The journeys are what happened in between these places. It's a very practical question. You might say it's a klutz kasha, what the Rebbe sometimes calls a simple, plain question, but it begs an explanation. So the Rebbe says that perhaps it can be answered based on a Rashi earlier, that the last line of the book of Shemos, of Exodus, finishes off that the heavenly cloud hovered over them in the presence of all the eyes of the children of Israel, b'chol Masei, and all the journeys. That's the end of the whole portion of Shemos. By the way, we see that the word journeys is used over and over. Never does the Torah really speak about their encampments. It speaks about them journeying and encamping as a verb, but as a noun, it speaks about their journeys. In our portion, and it's the name of the whole portion, and in the end of Shemos and in other places, it speaks about their trips as journeys. It should really speak about it as encampments. So that bothers Rashi there. Apparently, says the Rebbe, take a look at the last Rashis in the book of Shemos, and Rashi says an encampment is also okay to be referred to as a journey, because it's from there that you journey on. It's a good enough answer. There were people in my class today, as I taught this to our local community, who said, yeah, well, this is semantics. You call a journey, take the example of the guy who went to Europe. One person will say, I'm telling you my different places where I visited. The other will say, I'll tell you my trips. We took a trip to London, we took a trip here. It's the same difference, because a trip leads up to a visit and vice versa. So the Torah chose to use the word journeys. It's not a problem. That's the Rebbe's straightforward answer based on a Rashi. But the Rebbe digs further. But why did the Torah make that choice? You're right that journeys and encampments are interchangeable, and journeys include encampments and vice versa. But why highlight the less important and thereby also refer to the more important? What's the purpose? Is it the journey or the encampments? The trip or the places that I'm actually visiting? Clearly, it's the encampments. The purpose and the goal should be the thing that we talk about. We visited A, we visited B, we visited C. Those are encampments. So if you have a choice of choosing one term, the term that should be used is the main term. We had encampments. We had destinations, which clearly included trips to those destinations. Why do we highlight the less important? The means rather than the ends. And we talk about journeys rather than destinations. So the Rebbe is sort of pushing back and saying, but why does Rashi say that? So the Rebbe gives a suggested answer. Let me bring it up on the screen so we see the flow. So here we have the Rebbe's question, why journeys? It should say encampments. The proposed answer number one is encampments also referred to as journeys. It's a quote from Rashi at the end of Shemos, because from there you journey further. But since encampment is the purpose, why say journeys and also mean encampments? Do it the other way around. So proposed answer number two is sort of an overlay on one. Well, if we have a choice to do it this way, do it that way. We're choosing to do it that way, and I'll tell you why. Because in the end, the journey is really to bring them to the promised land. The journey wasn't to bring them to Ramses or to Sukkos or to Har Sinai or to whatever. The journey was really, there was a goal. And the goal is the thing that should be highlighted, correct? The goal isn't the 42 encampments. The goal is the ultimate, to go to the Holy Land. And therefore, it makes sense to refer to the encampments as journey, because really, this is really a journey. This is really one long trip. The example I would give here is if somebody is moving from New York to Melbourne, not they're taking a vacation to Europe, where the goal are the destinations that you visit. Rather, they're moving to Australia. But to move to Melbourne, they spend a few days in California, spend a few days in Europe, a few days in Asia, and then they come. Here, it's one big journey. Their goal is to get to Australia because they're moving. That's a destination. Except it's a very long trip, and maybe they have some friends along the way. So that's making some stopovers. And then you can refer to the whole thing as one trip, because really that's the goal. So this answers the Rebbe's earlier question. The Rebbe's question was, when you're giving something a name, focus on the purpose, not on the means to the purpose. And the purpose are the encampments. Not really. If you think about it deeper, the purpose is the journey to the final destination. And therefore, it makes sense to use that term, journey. But then the Rebbe says that would be a satisfactory answer if it would say journey in singular. To use my example, it's correct to say, well, how was your trip to Australia? Even though it took me a month and it was 5 different mini trips in the interim and vacations and whatever, but there's one trip to Australia because that's my focus. But if I say trips, I wouldn't say how are my trips to Australia. The Torah here uses it in plural, the journeys. The only thing that's pluralistic here are the encampments. The journeys are all the same. They're just another stretch, another leg of the trip to get me to my final destination. If you're talking plural, which are going to be the 42 listings, it's a whole lot of destinations. The only thing pluralistic, the only thing different about the 42 things, the only thing unique about each one is the location, not the fact that it's another leg in the same trip. And therefore, that answer doesn't hold up either. So the Rebbe goes deeper. I want to just point out that my understanding is that on a pshat level, on a literal level, this is not really a question. The Rebbe's answer is going to be according to Chassidus. On the literal answer, the answer is what Rashi said at the end of Pekudei. The first answer that the Rebbe gave. That a journey and an encampment are interchangeable. And a journey also means an encampment. And vice versa. And perhaps answer 2 makes that even better. Why did the Torah choose that? Well, because ultimately it's one long journey. But on the pshat level, it's not a problem. On the literal level of Torah study, you don't have to split that here. But on a deeper level, you still ask yourself, if these 2 terms are interchangeable, why would the Torah use the term that's less important and highlight it, and it becomes the name of the portion? And I said earlier, this is what's used as a noun throughout Torah. The journeys of the Jewish people. Right? There's even the famous musical group called Journeys. Nobody has a musical group called encampments because there isn't such a thing in Torah, even though the word encampments. But they're not the noun. They're not the thing that's highlighted. What is highlighted are the journeys. Really? These 42 are journeys? They're not journeys, they're encampments. The journeys are what happened in between. So on a non-pshat level, on a deeper level, there's got to be a reason why that's the case. And that's where the Rebbe pushes further in the Sicha. So here begins the explanation. The Rebbe opens up the explanation by introducing the fact that the Baal Shem Tov taught us that these journeys really speak to the personal journey of each of us in life. We are each meant to go 42 steps, 42 madrigis, 42 levels of spiritual and moral growth throughout life. And the Baal Shem Tov will explain how each of these represents a different thing. They're all steps in a positive direction. Rebbe cites an example, the Kivros HaTaiba, the place where what's called the burial of temptation, because the historic meaning is because the people that overindulge in temptation of the food, they died from it coming out of their nostrils, what have you. On a spiritual level, it's a positive place. It's a place where you bury your overindulgence. It's a level, the Rebbe calls it the level of Chachma, a level of a person's journey where they overcome the need for overindulgence in physical pleasures. And the same as all the 42 stops, each one represents another level of personal growth, of spiritual growth in our journey. That's why they're here, which, by the way, makes sense why the Torah has to list them. Otherwise, why do we need to know? This is something that happened in the past. What's the relevance? Clearly, Chassidus teaches us each word in Torah has relevance to us, and the Baal Shem Tov presents this relevance, that this is really our journey, and we need to keep moving forward and to constantly grow. And there's 42 steps of more growth and more growth and more growth, spirituality, morality, goodness, kindness, refinement of our midos, our emotions, our character, refinement of our minds, refinement of our soul, what have you, of our animal soul, the whole journey. There's 42 of them. Parenthetically, sometimes in Chassidus, it's explained the number 42 because it's 6 times 7, right? It's the 6 primary emotions, the 7th being Malchus, which is action. So it's 6 times 7. It's because it's the 7th is the application, but how each one includes all the others. And that's why the number 42 becomes a significant number in Torah and in the journey. So now it starts to make some sense. If this is about my journey, this is about the mission where God says, I want you to grow. I use the word journey, growth. But the Rebbe still says, but why? If you're talking about personal growth means an encampment. I came to a plateau. I'm on the first level of my service of Hashem. Now I'm on the second level. It is still seemingly more appropriate to use the word encampment, says the Rebbe, because each of these steps should be like a journey. You're right, it's 42 steps, it's 42 encampments, 42 stations of spiritual growth and development. However, the Torah chooses to say the word journeys and rather than encampments, because it's teaching us that how we should take that journey. The growth should not be slow, incremental, or what have you, it should be bigger. The Rebbe introduces in the Sicha here 3 levels of personal growth, from Torah sources. This is from Torah sources, even biblical sources, and certainly in Chassidus. We sometimes use the language of Amida, standing. We sometimes use the language of Halicha, walking, and we sometimes use the language of Nesia, which means journey, or it could be Diluk, which means to jump. And the Rebbe says, let's analyze this. Standing is a term with which we describe the Malachim, the angels. Hashem says to the prophet, I will cause you to be walking amongst these that are standing, representing the angels. The angels, we say that by the Shemona Esrei, we keep our feet together because we try to mimic the angels who have 1 foot, 1 leg. They don't walk, they just stand. Now, clearly angels don't have a physical body. What is the metaphor of the 1 foot? They don't really grow, but everything grows. Yeah, but at the end of the day, they are what they are. Just like the metaphor of animals. An animal has its nature. It's not going to exponentially grow. It's not going to change from kind to cruel or vice versa. It is what it is. However, every living thing grows. So yeah, if it's loving, it'll become more loving, I guess. If it's cruel, it might become more cruel. Things grow, but it's incremental growth. You may not notice that growth. Similarly, the angels, which are really the spiritual source of animals, and they're very lofty beings. They're gigantic animals. They have tremendous knowledge of Hashem, very, very lofty. Some of them are, the world of Bria and Yetzirah, very lofty, and tremendous love for Hashem, gigantic. However, they're called standing because their growth is incremental. Think of it as the penguin, it's one-legged. It wobbles. It can wiggle its way forward. It will grow, but it is what it is. The angel of water will remain an angel of love. The other angel of fear will remain an angel of fear. Although it will progress in that area, but it won't change lanes. And it won't grow in a way that is so obvious, that is exponential, that is with leap and bounds. It's step by step. And that is one way of growth. A lot of people do that. And that's okay. If you're not doing that at all, then you're probably going backwards. But then there is, in Judaism, we say, no, a person is a mahalach. A person can walk. We weren't created with one leg. We could have been. We were created with two legs because Hashem wants us to have the ability to leave our space and go to a new space, to take on a new level of personal growth or growth in any area of life. This can be psychological, this can be spiritual, this can be financial. Let's walk. And that's perhaps what the Torah means by describing this growth as journeys. That these steps, yes, it's about the steps, it's about the encampments, the plateaus, the levels, but don't go from one to the other in a limited way, in an incremental way. Walk it. And then the Rebbe pushes further. It doesn't just say hiloch, it could have said that, or another term that denotes obvious growth but slow. Rather, it uses the word Masei, and if you look at the sources, the Rebbe brings many sources. That word is used to say, I completely left that destination. Many examples the Rebbe uses where that word is used interchangeably. Where I just left, I'm gone. I'm not going back there, I'm in a new place. Think about the difference between walking, which is already real obvious growth, versus jumping. In walking, I have one foot on the ground, even as I'm walking forward. In jumping, I'm lifting both feet off the ground. The example that I'm suggesting, just to help us understand it, think about business. You have a small business. I don't know, you're running a small shop, and you're making a living. And your accountant or business advisor will tell you, you have to always bring in new products. You have to have some growth, but that might be considered incremental growth. I'm standing still, but I'm just keeping up. I'm bringing in all the new products that come out. Otherwise, I'm going to become irrelevant. But that's still standing still. I'm still in my same little shop. And then the business coach comes and says, listen, let's grow. And that might be that instead of the little shop, I'm going to expand it. I'm going to double the store. I don't know. That's risky. That's like walking. I took a foot off the ground. We're very comfortable with both feet on the ground. I took a foot off the ground. I risked some of my resources. I don't know if it'll work, but I'm still keeping one foot on the ground. I haven't gone to a quantum leap. I haven't gone to a whole new space. And therefore, that is growth. And it's real growth, but it's cautious growth. It's not totally letting go of the past. And that might be nice. But sometimes the coach will say, it's time to jump. It's time, diluk. It's time to just skip. Don't open a bigger store. Open a chain of stores. Create an online presence that you're shipping all over the world. I don't know. It's a whole new quantum leap. And that's, says the Rebbe, and explains in the Sicha in great detail, that it's not standing, it's walking. It's not even walking, it's jumping. And that's what the Torah wants by telling us, by referring to these encampments as journeys, because it's referring not just to the encampments historically, but to our personal encampments and plateaus and steps. But it doesn't use the term encampments and steps. It actually refers to them as journeys, because each step should be a journey away from the prior. We should completely let go of the past and leap ahead. I gave an example in business. Obviously, the main example should be in spirituality. It's one thing to say, I'm going to grow from time to time. I'll start learning a little more Torah. I'll start doing more mitzvahs. It's another to take on new things. I'm giving this share in my community, and people ask me, what's an example of taking a leap? I said, you guys, 3 years ago, deciding to learn Likutei Sichos is a leap. You're not 10 years old, you're 40, you're 50, you're 60, you're 70, and suddenly you're starting a whole new way of Torah study and you're engaged in it. That's a leap. Some of you then started learning Rambam. For an American Long Island Jew who never went to yeshiva to say, I'm going to learn Rambam, a chapter a day, that's a leap. It's like, what? This is not even on the radar screen. This isn't like I'm studying a little more, I'm going into a whole new thing. And of course, they have to keep on growing too. But that's what the Rebbe is telling us. That's a takeaway from this Sicha. Hashem wants us to keep progressing in life, in every area, but primarily in Yiddishkeit and spirituality and personal growth. And our hachlotas, our resolutions from time to time, our engagement in Torah and mitzvahs should be on a whole level. We should think out of the box. And that's why the Torah uses the word Masei, and that's why it's such a big deal. It's a noun in Torah. In many places, it's a thing. We journey, we don't encamp. But the encampment should have a journey element to them, a journey flavor to them. And the Rebbe says that this lines up well with the Alter Rebbe's teaching in the Likutei Torah. The language of the text is, these are the journeys of the Jewish people as they left the land of Egypt. And the Alter Rebbe asks a very simple question. It's a different question than this Sicha is asking. Why does it say plural, that these are the journeys when they left Egypt? Leaving Egypt was one journey from Ramses to Sukkos. The other journeys, they had already left Egypt. So what's this plural language? These are the journeys of the Jewish people leaving Egypt. The Alter Rebbe explains that really they're constantly leaving Egypt, if we interpret it along the lines of Baal Shem Tov, that this is a person's personal growth, which is a lifelong endeavor. Each time we grow, it's a personal exodus. So not just when we're going from a space of Egypt, of constraint, where we're Chas v'Shalom not yet serving Hashem, to the first step of serving Hashem, have we now had experience of exodus. But even when we go from there to the next one and to the next one throughout life, I might be in a pretty good station in my Yiddishkeit, but now that I'm taking a quantum leap to the next one, I should view the prior one as in Egypt, as a place of Mitzrayim, which is translated in Chassidus to mean Mitzarim Ugvulim, limitation. I'm going from good to great, as the language is. I should see it as going from nothing to great. Because if I understand that Torah wants me to constantly leap and come to a new place, so the prior place, as good as it might have seemed yesterday, is a constraint. It's in Egypt. So the Rebbe is explaining this, the meaning, the essence of the word Masei, and basing it on the Baal Shem Tov and on the Alter Rebbe and the Likutei Torah. And obviously, there's a tremendous takeaway in terms of our growth and we should always look to grow, not just to stand or walk, but even to leap. And then the Rebbe gives a second point. And that is that there's another interpretation in Chassidus and the Likutei Torah, that the 42 journeys represent the 42 stops throughout the Jewish exile, the Golus. And how is that related? Because the desert, which was treacherous, is symbolic, is a metaphor of the entire exile of the Jewish people. And all of these places, this is the opposite interpretation from the Baal Shem Tov. Not each of them represents another spiritual growth, goodness, greatness, and accomplishment, but rather the opposite. Each is a place which we suffered or we angered Hashem or what have you. You might envision that Hashem is counting and it keeps a list of all the Yiddish tzaddis. You know what I mean? From Dachau to Auschwitz to the Inquisitions, to throughout history. It's a list of Golus. Golus, by and large, is just a sequence, a whole list of tsuris, setbacks, and pitfalls, all the way to Mashiach. And how is this hinted, says the Alter Rebbe? It's hinted because the Torah says that this is a journey from Egypt, which means constraint, all the way to the Holy Land, and Yarden, Yerecha, Jericho, which is a hint to the Messianic era Mashiach. And how so? Because it says Mashiach will judge by smell, and the final destination, the final leg in the journey in the Torah is called Jericho Yericha, which is the word smell. Parenthetically, why is Mashiach going to judge by smell? Because it's explained that there's going to be such a revelation of Hashem that we're not going to judge by hearsay, which is one level of judging where you gather information and you study a subject, but everyone understands it's not like seeing it. A higher level is, which is perhaps the level of prophets or tzaddikim, or level of each of us on our neshama level, on our faith level, where we sort of see Hashem. We know it as a fact, even if we can't explain it. So that's a higher level of connection to that truth of Hashem. But at the end of the day, both are in common, that it's us seeing Hashem as a separate thing. Whether I hear it, even if I see it, it's something outside of me. I might be sure about it, but it's still not me. It's not internalized. I won't even argue that what I saw, maybe I'm not seeing right. Maybe it's Photoshop, I don't know. When you smell it means we recognize that Mashiach will judge by smell, which by extension means that the whole Jewish nation and the whole world really will feel Hashem's presence, like smell. Hashem is the air that we breathe, internalized, like a person who faints and you bring him back with smell. It's not an experience on the outside, hearing and gathering information, not even seeing, knowing for a fact that the information is correct. It's not information. It's the air that we breathe. That's what scent is. That's why it's such a powerful a connection. It's a powerful experience. It's not even a connection to something else. It's internalizing yourself with something else. And that's the relationship of the world at the time of Mashiach with Elikus, with godliness. So that's the Alter Rebbe's explanation in the Likutei Torah on these 42 journeys. It says that Rebbe now apply this in Avodah, in our personal service. We each have our own journey. But the flip side of what we said earlier, the steps upwards. What about the pitfalls? What about the sins that we've done along the way? What about the mistakes? What about the things in life that we wish we could undo? They too are called journeys. Even if they seem like a step backwards or many steps backwards, ultimately they're a step forward. Every step backwards, even if it's a negative or even if it's by choice a sin, it brings us to tshuva. Tshuva doesn't just bring you back to where you would have been without the sin. It's like a slingshot. The example I give to people is I say, if your marriage is tested, and I like to tell people that I don't believe a marriage really becomes a real marriage until it's tested in a serious way. And why? Because it hasn't been tested. We don't know. Marriage represents an unconditional relationship. We don't know if it's unconditional. It hasn't been tested. The conditions have been good. If it's really tested, and it's perhaps stretching the rubber band and it's about to tear apart, God forbid, and you overcome it, that represents that this is unbreakable. This is unconditional. This is real. And that's the power of tshuva with us and Hashem. The person made mistakes, setbacks, what have you, and they bounce back. It's a journey. It's a plus. It's a step forward. This is an extremely powerful lesson to all of us in our lives. We all have things in life in our past which we wish we could undo. And we look back and we say, well, why did I have to do that? Or why did I waste all those years in a relationship that was meaningless? And then I had to start over and I just wasted 10 or 20 good years. Did all that in business areas, which were a mistake, or personal areas, which were a mistake, or spiritual areas, whatever it is, detours in life that if I can replay the tape, I would have just cut out that piece and saved myself 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years or more. It was a waste. Says Torah, no. Says the Rebbe in the Sicha, no. I like to present it that in the book, in your book, Torah is your book. It's got all 42 journeys. Every single step of your life, the good and the bad and the ugly, is written in the book. It's part of who you are. It's part of who you are today by virtue of all the experiences, good and bad and indifferent, of the past, including that which happened to us by destiny or by our choices, good and bad. They're all part of the journey. No card can be skipped. At the end of the day, in hindsight, the Rebbe maintains there are no accidents, including our own sins or our own mistakes. In hindsight, there are no accidents. Clearly, moving forward, we should try to make the right decisions. But in hindsight, it was all meant to be. It's all part of our journey. It's written in our book, namely the Torah. And that's why the Torah recounts all the 42 steps, even though they exist in the Torah before. If you go through the whole Chumash slowly, you can find the 42 pretty much. They're relisted here to tell every Jew, don't look back. You are who you are today because of the 10 years that you wasted in that endeavor and the other 5 years and the other experiences that you wish you could undo. It's all part of the journeys. And the Rebbe explains this on a personal level and also on the macro and the micro, the Jewish people as a whole. And that's why we read this portion in the 3 weeks to bring home the message that the 3 weeks, which nominally we're crying over the past, but not really. We are praying and being excited and positive and filled with light and positivity, almost joy for the future, for Mashiach. Because we know at the end of the day, the past is only part of the future. It's all journeys in the positive leading up to Mashiach. I want to just share briefly that there's a beautiful Vart in Chassidus, also from the Alter Rebbe. The Rebbe highlights elsewhere that, and why am I mentioning it? Because it's easy, it'll help us to remember the takeaway of this Sicha. First of all, to recap, the takeaway of the Sicha is 2 things. Number 1, the 42 journeys in the positive. As we grow, we should look for leaping growth, not just incremental growth. We should try to make new resolutions that we never expected we would do. We should try to go out of the box from time to time, if possible. And the second thing is that also the negative, the setbacks, the mistakes, the sins, the tragedies, even God forbid, of life, to embrace them and know that they are part of our journey and they are really part of what's propelling us forward. In psychological terms, they would say today, post-traumatic growth. They're all journeys. So to remember that latter point, I'm sharing with you this from Chassidus, that in today's portion also Masei, it's going to tell us something else that involves the number 42, namely the 42 cities of refuge. Now, wait a minute, aren't there 6 cities of refuge? Yes. But then the Torah says, in addition to the main cities of 6 cities of refuge scattered throughout Israel, there were 42 additional. These were the Levite, the Levium's suburban areas, which were outside the cities, a total of 42 additional cities of refuge. And the Torah talks about it. So Chassidus explains, in our daily life, a city of refuge is a place to run away from sin. Sin is like, what is a city of refuge? To protect the manslaughter, the person who took a life inadvertently. Whenever we sin, it's like taking a life. We're taking our neshama away from its source, from Hashem. We're doing it inadvertently because the neshama essentially doesn't want to sin. So we have to go to the city of refuge. How to protect ourselves from sin, how to overcome it. City of refuge. So the Rebbe explains, the Rebbe explains in Chassidus that this is the 6 cities of the 6 words of the Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Which also represents the 6 constant mitzvahs. Most mitzvahs are not constant, except for 6. Faith and love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, etc. And those are the things that keep us in line and hopefully keep us in a city of refuge. But then we go to Bahafta. Shema has 6 words. Bahafta has 42 words, hinting to 42 additional cities of refuge. In this context, what does this mean? That if I embrace the 6 cities of refuge, the 6 constant mitzvahs, or the theme of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that Hashem is everything, and therefore everything is with divine providence, Hashgacha Pratis. So then in the whole V'ahavta, the whole 42, in all my steps of life, the good, the bad, the painful, the pleasurable, the, God forbid, tragic, the mitzvahs, the sins, I see in the whole 42 a refuge, because it all becomes positive. It all becomes part of the journey to bring us to our own personal redemption and a mitzvah Shem to the collective redemption.